B'siyata d'shmaya, we continue learning a little bit of Bitachon. Today is going to be a little bit different, as today we're going to take yesterday's concept and elaborate upon it through some incredible stories brought down by Rav David Sutton over here. We're learning the 14th chapter, in which we learned that Hishtadlus, in its very nature, is pointless. We've learned it's a decree of the king. We learned it's necessity, but at the same time, not necessarily does that translate into what we need. There's something called we have to work hard, we have to do our Hishtadlus, and then how Hashem is going to provide to us is almost a separate entity. And the truth is, that last line I just said is the addendum that we're adding on today, which we didn't mention yesterday. Is the Bais HaLevi continues and he says, after the person does what's incumbent upon him. You got a job, you went to the doctor, you did the necessary hishtadlus, the necessary whatever we feel is the right amount. Upara chayvai, and at some level we paid our debt. We checked that box. We did the gizeres hamelech, whatever we do. Then shuv yiftach b'Hashem. At that moment, we turn off the computer. We go home and we have bitachon, ki yasmin loy parnasasa, that Hashem is going to make our sustenance, our parnasa, available to us. And Rav David Sutton now elaborates that there's two things happening here. We all know that in Rosh Hashanah, Hashem decrees how much money we'll have, but He also decrees how we will get that money. And not necessarily is our hishtadlus going to yield the money. The money could come elsewhere. And he brings now tons of stories. The Brisker Rav, for example, he raised money for yeshiva, and the Brisker Rav remarked about himself that after some time he started realizing that whenever he thought for sure this donor, this avenue is going to bring him the money, all of a sudden the money came elsewhere. And he remarked that, of course, I have to do my Hishtadlus, but where the money is going to come from is a totally different point. He quotes over here. He quotes another incredible story that Rav David Soloveitchik told over. Rav David Soloveitchik told of a story of a woman who, what she would do is she would buy fabrics in bulk and then sell them for a higher price to the local duke. And one time she couldn't go to the fair to buy the fabrics, and therefore she went to her husband and she told her husband, listen, you go. Her husband always sat and learned, so he didn't really know what to do. So the woman told him, very simple, here's the money, and it's very simple. 90% black fabric, 10% white fabric. Okay. The husband goes to the market, and of course, as every good story goes, before he goes to the market, he goes to the Beis Medrash. He sits down to learn. He gets engrossed in learning, and he shows up to the market pretty late. And he gets there as they're closing, and he goes and he's like, okay, 90% black. Well, they didn't have 90% black left. It was the end of the day. And what do they have? 90% white. 10% black. He said, okay, what am I going to do? He bought what he bought. He came home and his wife obviously was irate, livid. You messed it up. How could it be? Husband said, we'll have bitachon. I did my Hishtadlus. We'll now have bitachon. And of course, as every good story goes, what happened? The Duke, who was their biggest person or their biggest purchaser the day before, had a lavish party. And at the party, the Duke got drunk. And he's looking around the party, drunk, and he's like, why is everyone wearing black here? And everyone said, well, because black's cheaper, and that's the material, and that's the clothing the Duke makes for us. And the Duke says, cheaper? I'm a wealthy man. From now on, everything should be white with black trimmings. Of course, they went to look for white material, and no one had, aside for whom? Of course, this one woman, and she turned a handsome prophet. So the lesson is, obviously, we have to be responsible. One can't be negligent and say, oh, God will give me. Those were the past two shirim. That obviously we have to do our Hishtadlus. But we also have to realize that wherever the money is going to come, not necessarily is connected to that Hishtadlus. And Rav David Sutton ends and he said that he himself has heard such stories. He said a story that he knows a businessman that he didn't turn a sale in a very long time. And he sold high-end merchandise. And one day he's sitting in his office and he's sitting and he's crying, davening to Hashem. Nothing. All of a sudden, walks through the door, a sheik from Abu Dhabi, and purchases $250,000 of goods at that moment. You do Hishtadlus. We try. We think this is the avenue. We try that avenue. But then we sit down and we daven and we cry and we plead and we allow Hashem to take over. So an incredible realization. We have to alter the way we think. And it's difficult because what do you mean? I'm going to this job. That's where my parnasa comes. I'm going to this doctor. That's where my parnasa comes. It's true. But we have to realize and remind ourselves, we have to do our Hishtadlus. That's the Gezeras HaMelech. Where the money, where the refuah, where the success will come from, that's all up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu.